What happens when a desperate billionaire needs to escape an arranged marriage? Robert Carter, Manhattan's most arrogant heir, made an impulsive decision that changed everything. One kiss, one lie, one small-town secretary named Chloe, who never imagined her first day at Carter Industries, would throw her into the sophisticated world of New York's elite. But when pretending becomes passion and acting turns into desire, the heart doesn't follow scripts. If this story has already sparked your curiosity, please give it a like, subscribe to the channel and tell us in the comments, where are you listening to this story from? Your support is what keeps this channel alive. The elevator climbed through 60 floors, as if carrying all of Chloe Bennett's dreams and fears in its mirrored cabin. She adjusted her navy blue blazer for the 10th time, the one she'd bought specifically for this day, her first day as executive secretary at Carter Industries, one of Manhattan's most powerful companies. At 28, Chloe had left behind the small town of Savannah, Georgia, where everyone knew her as the teacher's daughter, or the girl who works at the library. Now surrounded by the steel and glass of the financial district's most imposing skyscraper, she felt like a stranger in foreign territory. 47th floor, announced the elevator's metallic voice. Chloe took a deep breath, feeling the subtle perfume she'd sprayed on her wrist, mixing with the coffee aroma emanating from the thermos she held tightly. Her mother always said coffee was the best companion for difficult moments, and this was definitely one of them. The doors opened to reveal an environment that looked like it had stepped out of an architecture magazine. The Carter Industries lobby was a universe of Italian marble, crystal chandeliers, and a panoramic view of New York that took your breath away. Impeccably dressed employees walked with purpose, talking on cell phones or carrying expensive leather briefcases. "You must be Chloe Bennett," said a female voice behind her. Chloe turned to find an elegant woman of about 40, perfectly styled blonde hair, and a professional smile that didn't reach her eyes. "I'm Margaret Collins, Director of Human Resources. Welcome to Carter Industries." "Thank you, Mrs. Collins. I'm very excited to get started." Margaret guided her through the maze of offices, pointing out glass-walled conference rooms, a break room with an Italian coffee machine, and workstations equipped with cutting-edge technology. "You'll be responsible for Mr. Robert Carter's schedule, our CEO," Margaret explained, her voice taking on a more serious tone. "He's demanding. He expects excellence in every aspect, absolute punctuality, and total discretion." Chloe nodded, though her stomach gave a little flip. "I understand completely." "I doubt it," Margaret murmured so quietly that Chloe almost didn't hear. They stopped in front of double doors of dark wood with a golden nameplate. "Robert Carter, Chief Executive Officer. Your desk is right here." Margaret indicated an elegant workspace strategically positioned to have a view of both the hallway and the CEO's entrance. "Mr. Carter always arrives at exactly 7:30. It's 7:25 now." Chloe's heart quickened. She had arrived purposely early, but hadn't imagined she'd be so close to her first encounter with her new boss. "He prefers his coffee black, no sugar, exactly 65 degrees Celsius," Margaret continued, handing her a typed list. "His appointments must be confirmed the day before and the morning of the meeting. He hates surprises, delays, or—" The sound of the elevator arriving interrupted the explanation. Margaret visibly tensed. "He's here," she whispered. Chloe felt her palms grow damp. She quickly checked her reflection in the computer screen, smoothed her brown hair that she'd pulled back in an elegant but relaxed bun, and straightened her shoulders. Firm footsteps echoed down the hallway. They weren't just footsteps, they were presence. Something in the air changed, as if the office atmosphere itself was rearranging to make space for whoever was approaching. Robert Carter appeared around the corner, like a force of nature wearing a charcoal grey suit that seemed to have been sewn directly onto his body. He was taller than Chloe had imagined, easily 6'1", with dark hair slightly tousled by the morning wind and a posture that radiated absolute authority. But it was his eyes that caught her off guard, green like emeralds, penetrating like X-rays, and completely focused on her. "Mrs. Collins?" His voice was deep, controlled, with an accent that spoke of expensive education and unshakable confidence. "I presume this is my new secretary." "Yes, Mr. Carter. Chloe Bennett, graduated in business administration from the University of Georgia, excellent references and— Miss Bennet, he interrupted, extending his hand. I hope you're prepared for this company's pace. When Chloe touched his hand, an electric current ran up her arm. He had a firm, warm grip and held her hand for a second longer than necessary. I'm more than prepared, Mr. Carter. For a moment, something passed through his eyes. Surprise, perhaps. Approval. But it disappeared so quickly she thought she'd imagined it. We'll see, he said, releasing her hand and walking toward his office. I want my coffee in 5 minutes, this week's schedule reviewed, and an analysis of pending contracts on my desk by 9 a.m. The door closed behind him with a definitive click. Margaret sighed. Welcome to Hurricane Carter. But Chloe remained standing for a moment, still feeling the warmth of that hand and the intensity of that green gaze. There was something about that man, beyond the obvious arrogance and power, that had sparked her curiosity. She had no idea that on the other side of that wooden door, Robert Carter was leaning against his desk, looking out the panoramic window, but thinking only about the determination he'd seen in his new secretary's brown eyes. Neither he nor she could imagine that this simple handshake had planted the first seed of something that would change their lives forever. At exactly 7:35, Chloe knocked on the dark wooden door carrying a silver tray with coffee, prepared exactly as Margaret had instructed. The rich, full-bodied aroma of the special Colombian blend hung in the air like a promise of morning energy. Come in, came the deep voice from the other side. Chloe pushed open the door and was immediately struck by the grandeur of Robert Carter's office. Floor-to-ceiling windows offered a 270-degree view of Manhattan, with Central Park stretching like a green carpet to the north. The decor was a sophisticated mix of modern and classic. Italian leather furniture, a mahogany desk that looked like it cost more than her car, and shelves filled with business and economics books. Robert stood behind his desk, white shirt with sleeves rolled up to his elbows, tie slightly loosened, reading a report with the concentration of a predator studying its prey. The morning light streaming through the windows created a golden halo around his silhouette, making him look more like a movie mogul than a real human being. Your coffee, Mr. Carter, Chloe said, carefully placing the tray on the desk. He looked up from the document, and again she felt that impact from his green eyes. This time, however, there was something different, a calculated assessment as if he were trying to decipher a complex puzzle. Temperature? He asked, picking up the cup without taking his eyes off her. 65 degrees Celsius, exactly. Robert took a sip and Chloe held her breath. Her entire career could depend on the temperature of that coffee. Adequate, was all he said, but she detected a note of surprise in his voice. I also brought your weekly schedule, Chloe said, placing an organized folder beside the cup. You have a meeting with Japanese investors at 10 a.m., lunch with the board at 12:30, and a conference call with the London branch at 3 p.m. I know my own schedule, Miss Bennet. The sharpness in his voice made Chloe take a step back, but something inside her, perhaps the same determination that had brought her from Savannah to New York, refused to be intimidated. So of course you do, she replied calmly. But I also reorganized some appointments. Your marketing meeting was scheduled for the same time as the conference call. I moved it to tomorrow at 9 a.m., which was free, and confirmed with both parties. Robert stopped with the cup in midair, his eyes narrowing slightly. You changed my schedule without consulting me? I corrected an obvious conflict that would have caused bigger problems if left unresolved, Chloe replied, keeping her voice steady. I thought you'd prefer efficiency to chaos. For a moment, the silence in the office was so thick, she could hear the tick-tock of the antique clock on the shelf. Robert studied her with an intensity that made her skin tingle, but Chloe didn't look away. She had learned long ago that backing down from intimidating men only encouraged them. Then something incredible happened. The corner of Robert's mouth curved into something that could almost be called a smile. Interesting, he murmured, placing the cup back on the saucer. Most people who work for me wouldn't have the courage to make such a decision without my prior approval. Maybe that's why you need a new secretary, Chloe replied, before she could stop herself. His green eyes sparkled. Amusement, irritation. It was impossible to tell. You have a sharp tongue, Miss Bennet. I hope your competence matches your boldness. You'll find that it does, Mr. Carter. Robert stood slowly, walking around the desk until he was only 3 feet away from her. Chloe could smell his masculine cologne, an expensive blend of cedar, bergamot, and something purely masculine that made her pulse quicken against her will. "Do you know what I hate most about incompetent people?" he asked, his voice low and dangerously smooth. "What?" Chloe asked, hating how her own voice came out slightly husky. "They waste my time." "And time, Ms. Bennett, is the only truly irreversible thing in this world." He was too close now. Chloe could see small golden flecks in his green eyes, the strong line of his jaw, the way his lips moved when he spoke. There was something hypnotic about his presence, a dangerous magnetism that made her common sense scream warnings. "So," he continued, "I suggest you prove you deserve every second I invest in you." "And how do you intend to measure that?" Chloe asked, surprised by her own boldness. "By results. I want you to completely reorganize my filing system by the end of the week. Learn the names, preferences, and history of all my major clients by Monday, and demonstrate that you can anticipate my needs, not just react to them." It was an impossible list of tasks for someone on their first day, and they both knew it. But there was something about the way he challenged her, as if he were testing not just her competence but her resilience, that made Chloe's blood boil with determination. "It will be done," she said simply. "It will be done, sir," he corrected, but there was a note of respect in his voice. "It will be done, Mr. Carter," Chloe repeated, allowing herself a small smile. "Anything else?" For a moment, Robert just looked at her, and Chloe had the strange sensation that he was seeing beyond her professional facade, straight into her soul. It was both unsettling and thrilling. "Not for now," he finally said, returning behind his desk. "But Miss Bennett." "Yes? Don't disappoint me. I don't tolerate disappointments." There was an implicit promise in his words, not just of termination if she failed, but of something more complex, more personal. Chloe nodded and headed for the door, aware that he was watching her every move. When she reached the door, she turned one last time. "Mr. Carter." "Yes?" "I also don't tolerate being underestimated." This time, his smile was definitely real, transforming his entire face and making something dangerous stir in Chloe's chest. She closed the door behind her, leaned against the cool wood for a moment, and realized her hands were trembling slightly. Not from fear, but from an electric energy that was still pulsing through her veins. Margaret appeared beside her like a ghost. "How did it go?" "I survived," Chloe replied, more to herself than to the HR director. But as she walked to her desk, she knew there was something dangerously addictive about the dynamic that had been established between her and Robert Carter. It was like playing with fire, knowing you could get burned, but unable to resist the heat. 3 days had passed since the first encounter between Chloe and Robert, and she had established an efficient routine that seemed to impress even the most veteran employees at Carter Industries. Her files were impeccable, her anticipation of Robert's needs was almost intuitive, and she had memorized not just the names of major clients, but also personal details that facilitated negotiations. It was a particularly busy Thursday. Robert had back-to-back meetings since 8 a.m., and Chloe coordinated everything with the precision of a conductor leading a symphony. She was reviewing contracts when she heard loud voices coming from the hallway, something unusual in the always controlled environment of the 47th floor. "Where is my son?" the voice was commanding, accustomed to being obeyed without question. Chloe looked up to see a man of about 60 walking toward her. It was impossible not to recognize Richard Carter, the older, more severe version of Robert. Perfectly styled gray hair, a three-piece suit that probably cost more than her monthly salary, and an expression that suggested the entire world should bend to his will. "Mr. Carter," Chloe stood quickly, "your son is in a meeting with—" "I don't care who he's with," Richard interrupted, walking straight past her desk toward the office door. "This is family business." Before Chloe could protest, he had already opened the door and entered without ceremony. She hesitated for a moment. Should she follow him? Call security? Pretend she hadn't heard anything? The decision was made for her when she heard Robert's voice, clearly irritated. "Dad, I told you I won't discuss this now. And I told you you've already wasted enough time," Richard's voice echoed through the office. "The Harringtons have been waiting for an answer for 3 months. Chloe found herself inadvertently approaching the slightly open door, her curiosity overcoming her professionalism. Through the crack, she could see Robert standing behind his desk, hands resting on the mahogany surface, shoulders tense like a taut rope. "Madison is an excellent choice," Richard continued, pacing the office like a general planning a battle. "Harvard graduate, respectable family, connections that could expand our business into Europe. She's perfect." "For you, maybe," Robert replied, his voice low and dangerous. "I'm the one who'll have to live with her for the rest of my life." "You'll live very well with all the money and power this union will bring to the company." Chloe felt her stomach tighten. An arranged marriage? In the 21st century? It seemed like something out of a historical romance, not Manhattan reality. "The company already has enough money and power," Robert said, walking around the desk to face his father. "I don't need to sell myself like cattle to expand our empire." "Don't be dramatic. Madison is beautiful, intelligent, and from a good family. Many men would kill for an opportunity like this. Then I suggest you find one of those many men." The silence that followed was so charged that Chloe could feel it even from outside the door. She knew she should walk away, return to her desk and pretend she hadn't heard anything. But there was something in Robert's voice, a vulnerability hidden beneath all that arrogance that kept her glued to the spot. "Robert." Richard's voice became softer, more manipulative. "You're 32 years old. You're not getting any younger. Madison is 26, at her best age for having children, and her family and ours are compatible in every aspect. It's a logical union." "Logical?" Robert repeated the word like it was a curse. "And where does love fit into all this, Dad?" Richard laughed, a dry, humorless sound. "Love? Do you really believe in that romantic nonsense? Your mother and I had an arranged marriage, and it was perfectly functional for 35 years until she died." Functional. Now it was Robert who repeated the word with disdain. What a wonderful word to describe a marriage. Chloe felt a pang in her chest. Robert's mother had died. Suddenly some pieces of the puzzle began to fall into place. His coldness, the obsessive need for control, the resistance to showing any vulnerability. "You have until the end of the month to give the Harringtons a definitive answer," Richard said, his voice returning to its authoritative tone. "And I expect it to be positive. I've already scheduled a dinner for Saturday night at our house. You, Madison, and both families. It's time to seal this deal." "It's not a deal, Dad, it's my life." "Your life is this company, Robert, and this company needs this alliance." Chloe heard footsteps approaching the door and quickly returned to her desk, pretending to be absorbed in spreadsheets. Seconds later, Richard Carter emerged from the office like a storm that had passed, his face a mask of implacable determination. He stopped beside Chloe's desk, his cold eyes assessing her as if she were a piece of furniture he was considering replacing. "You're new here." It wasn't a question. "Yes, sir, 1 week." "Well, Miss Bennett, Chloe Bennett. Miss Bennett, a word of advice. In this family, we keep our private matters private. Understood?" There was a clear threat in his voice, but also a test. Chloe met his eyes without hesitation. "Perfectly, Mr. Carter. Discretion is an essential part of my job." He studied her for another moment, then nodded slightly before heading to the elevator. As soon as the elevator doors closed, Chloe heard a loud noise coming from Robert's office, as if something heavy had been thrown against the wall. She hesitated, then knocked softly on the door. "Mr. Carter, is everything okay?" "Come in." She opened the door to find Robert looking out the window, hands buried in his pockets, shoulders tense. A crystal vase that used to sit on the shelf was in pieces on the floor. "Sorry about the mess," he said without turning. "I'll pay for the cleaning." "Don't worry about it," Chloe said gently, getting a broom from the cleaning closet. "Accidents happen." He finally turned to look at her, and she was surprised by the exhaustion she saw in his green eyes. "It wasn't exactly an accident." Chloe began sweeping up the crystal pieces, choosing her words carefully. "Sometimes it's better to break a vase than to break something that can't be fixed." Robert watched her work, something changing in his expression. "You heard the conversation." It wasn't a question, and Chloe decided honesty was the best policy. "I heard part of it. I'm sorry. It wasn't my intention." "And what's your opinion on arranged marriages, Ms. Bennett?" The question caught her by surprise. She stopped sweeping and looked at him directly. I think every person deserves to choose who they'll spend the rest of their life with. And that love isn't romantic nonsense. It's the only thing that makes life truly worth living. Something passed through his eyes. Surprise, perhaps even gratitude. What an optimistic view. What a realistic view, she corrected. Happiness isn't a luxury, Mr. Carter. It's a right. For a moment, they simply looked at each other across the office, a silent understanding passing between them. Then Robert looked away, his professional mask slipping back into place. I need you to cancel my Saturday night appointments, he said, returning to his desk. It seems I have a family dinner to attend. The resignation in his voice made Chloe's heart tighten. She finished cleaning up the crystal shards, but before leaving, she turned one last time. Mr. Carter. Yes? Sometimes courage isn't about fighting giant monsters. Sometimes it's just saying no at the right time. She left before he could respond, but not before seeing a flash of something, hope, perhaps, cross his face. Outside the door, Chloe leaned against her desk and took a deep breath. She had just crossed an invisible line, offering something dangerously close to personal advice to her boss. But something about the vulnerability she had seen in his green eyes made her not regret it. She just had no idea that within a few days her words about courage would be tested in a way she could never imagine. Saturday arrived with a fine rain that left Manhattan wrapped in a melancholic atmosphere. Chloe had spent the weekend exploring the city, trying not to think about the dinner Robert was being forced to attend that night. But it was useless. Since Thursday, she couldn't get the resignation she had seen in his green eyes out of her mind. Monday arrived with Carter Industries' typical morning chaos. Chloe arrived at 7:15 as always, but found Robert already in his office, apparently having worked for hours. There was something different about him, an even more intense tension than usual, like a violin string stretched to its limit. Good morning, Mr. Carter, she said, entering with the perfectly prepared coffee. How was your weekend? He looked up from the spreadsheets and she immediately saw he hadn't slept well. There were subtle dark circles under his eyes and his tie was slightly crooked, something unthinkable for the Robert Carter she knew. Enlightening, was all he said, returning to the papers. Chloe placed the coffee on the desk and was about to leave when she heard voices in the hallway. Familiar voices, and one of them made her stomach tighten. I simply don't understand why he's being so difficult about this, a female voice was saying, clear and crystalline like expensive crystal. It's just a marriage, not a death sentence. Madison, dear, came Richard Carter's voice, give Robert time. He just needs to get used to the idea. Chloe glanced quickly at Robert and saw his jaw clench. He knew they were coming. The door opened without ceremony. Apparently, knocking was a foreign concept to the Carter family, and Richard entered, followed by a woman who looked like she'd stepped directly from the pages of Vogue. Madison Harrington was everything Chloe had imagined she would be. Platinum blonde, model thin, wearing a camel wool coat that probably cost more than a year's rent. Her blue eyes scanned the office with the ownership of someone who already considered herself the owner of the place. Robert, darling, Madison practically sang, walking toward his desk with calculatedly graceful movements. You look tired. I hope you're not working too hard. Madison. Robert stood but made no move to greet her. Dad, to what do I owe this unexpected visit? We wanted to discuss the details of the engagement announcement, Richard said, settling into one of the leather chairs. The Times social section is waiting for an official statement. Chloe felt she should leave, give privacy for what would clearly be a tense family conversation. But Madison noticed her before she could move. And who is this? Madison asked, her blue eyes assessing Chloe from head to toe with a coldness that made her skin crawl. My secretary, Chloe Bennett, Robert replied, his voice strangely tense. Oh, Madison smiled, but it was a smile that didn't reach her eyes. How charming. I suppose you'll be dismissed when we marry, dear. I prefer to bring my own staff. The implication was clear. You're not good enough for this family. Chloe felt blood rise to her face, but before she could respond, Robert's voice cut through the air like a blade. No one is being dismissed, he said coldly. And there's no engagement to be announced. Madison's smile faltered. Robert, darling, you can't be serious. After Saturday's dinner, I thought it had become clear. What became clear? Robert stood, walking around the desk with controlled movements, "is that all of you seem to have forgotten that I have the right to choose my own wife." "Don't be ridiculous," Richard intervened. "You have responsibilities to this family, to the company." "I have responsibilities to myself," Robert interrupted, "and I won't marry someone I don't love." Madison laughed, a shrill, unpleasant sound. "Love? Really, Robert? You can't be so naive. Marriage is about partnership, about building empires together. Love is for ordinary people." Something about the way she said ordinary people, looking directly at Chloe, made hot anger explode in Chloe's chest. It was the same condescending tone she'd faced all her life, from people who thought they knew her worth based on her bank account or zip code. "Maybe," Chloe heard her own voice, before she even realized she was going to speak. "Love is exactly what makes someone extraordinary." The silence that followed was deafening. Madison stared at her like she was a particularly repugnant insect that had dared to speak. Richard seemed too shocked to react. But Robert was looking at her with an expression she had never seen before, pure intensity, as if she were the only person in the world at that moment. "Excuse me," Madison said, her voice dripping venom, "but I don't remember asking for the help's opinion." "She's not help," Robert said, his voice low and dangerous. "She's—" And then it happened. In a movement that surprised everyone in the room, including himself, Robert crossed the office in 3 long strides, stopped in front of Chloe, held her face in his hands, and kissed her. It wasn't a gentle or hesitant kiss. It was a kiss that contained months of frustration, years of life lived on other people's terms, decades of repressed emotions. It was a kiss that spoke of possibilities, of freedom, of choice. Chloe felt the world disappear around her. There was only the warmth of Robert's hands on her face, the taste of coffee and something purely masculine on his lips, his scent enveloping her like a promise. For one insane moment, she allowed herself to melt into that kiss, returning it with an intensity that surprised her. When they finally separated, she could see her own shock reflected in his green eyes. But then the mask returned to place, and Robert turned to face the room in deadly silence. "Dad." "Madison!" His voice was perfectly controlled, as if kissing his secretary in the middle of a business meeting was something he did every day. "I'd like you to meet my girlfriend." "Your—" "What?" Madison stammered, her perfect face finally showing real emotion, total shock. "Chloe and I have been together for 3 months, Robert continued, improvising with an ease that was both impressive and terrifying. "I didn't want to make it public until I was sure it was serious. Now I am." Chloe felt like she was having a lucid dream, aware that none of this was real but unable to wake up. Robert slid an arm around her waist, pulling her to his side with an intimacy that made her heart race. This is absurd," Madison finally found her voice. "You can't be serious. She's just an incredible woman," Robert completed, his voice gaining a protective intensity that made something dangerous stir in Chloe's chest. "Intelligent, brave, authentic. Everything I've always wanted in a partner." Richard had stood up, his face red with indignation. "Robert, this is unacceptable. You can't throw away years of planning because of a whim." "It's not a whim," Robert said calmly. "It's love." The word hung in the air like a bomb about to explode. Chloe could feel Robert's heart beating against her arm, fast and irregular. He was improvising, she knew, but there was something about the way he said love that made her breath catch. "This won't end like this," Madison said, her voice trembling with anger. "My family won't accept this humiliation." "Then I suggest you find another groom," Robert replied coldly, "because this one is already taken." Madison looked between Robert and Chloe as if she were seeing aliens, then turned and left the office with furious steps, leaving only the echo of her expensive heels on the marble. Richard remained for a moment longer, his gaze alternating between his son and Chloe with a mixture of anger and something that almost seemed respect. "This isn't over, Robert," he finally said. "Yes, Dad," Robert replied calmly. "It is." When the door closed behind Richard, the silence in the office was absolute. Robert still had his arm around Chloe's waist, and she could feel tension emanating from him like heat. Slowly, he released her and took a step back. When their eyes met, there was a vulnerability in them she had never seen before. I'm sorry," he said, his voice hoarse. "I didn't have the right to—" "You had every right," Chloe interrupted, surprising them both with her firmness. "No one should be forced to marry someone they don't love." They looked at each other across the office, the weight of what had just happened hanging between them like a third presence. The kiss still burned on Chloe's lips, and she could see in Robert's dilated pupils that he felt the same. "So," she finally said, trying to inject lightness into her voice, "dating for 3 months. You could have at least warned me when our anniversary would be." To her surprise, Robert laughed, a genuine, rich sound she had never heard before. "First week of January," he said. "We met at a business conference in Boston." "Ah," Chloe nodded solemnly. "Of course. How could I forget?" And so, with a joke and a shared smile, they took the first step into a lie that would change their lives forever. The rest of the morning passed in a strange haze. Chloe executed her tasks on autopilot, answering phones, organizing meetings, reviewing contracts. But her mind was completely focused on the kiss that still burned on her lips, and the colossal lie Robert had created in a moment of desperation. At 11:30, when the last client left Robert's office, he appeared in the doorway with an expression that mixed determination and nervousness. "Ms. Bennett, could you come to my office, please? We need to talk." Chloe saved the document she was working on and followed him, aware that the other employees on the floor were watching with poorly disguised curiosity. News traveled fast at Carter Industries, and she was sure Madison's dramatic visit had already become the topic of the day. Robert closed the door behind her and gestured to one of the leather chairs in front of his desk. But instead of sitting behind the desk, he pulled another chair and positioned himself facing her, a more intimate configuration that made Chloe's heart quicken. "First," he began, running a hand through his dark hair, "I want to apologize again for everything that happened this morning. You shouldn't have been put in that position." "Robert," she said softly, using his first name for the first time, "you were being pressured to marry someone you clearly don't love. I understand why you acted impulsively." Something passed through his green eyes when she said his name. "Even so, I kissed you without permission and dragged you into a situation that could harm your career and reputation." Chloe tilted her head, studying his face. "So now what? What happens now?" Robert leaned forward, resting his elbows on his knees. "I have a proposal, and I know it's asking a lot, but you want me to keep pretending to be your girlfriend," Chloe completed. He nodded, looking almost embarrassed. "Madison won't give up easily. Neither will my father. If they find out it was just a desperate impulse, they'll intensify the pressure. But if they believe I have a serious relationship with you, they'll back off," Chloe finished the thought. "For a while, at least. Long enough for me to find a permanent way to deal with the situation." Chloe leaned back in her chair, crossing her legs. It was a surreal situation, being paid to pretend to date one of Manhattan's most powerful men. But there was something about the vulnerability Robert was showing, the way he had defended himself against Madison's cruel words, that touched something deep in her heart. "For how long?" she asked. "A few months? Maybe 6 at most. Long enough to convince them I won't change my mind." "And what exactly would this involve?" Robert seemed to have thought about this. "Attendance at some social events, occasional family dinners, maybe some strategic public appearances. Nothing intimate," he added quickly, his cheeks flushing slightly. Chloe almost smiled. After that apocalyptic kiss this morning, the idea that they could keep things not intimate seemed almost comical. "And what would my compensation be for this service?" "Double your current salary, plus a $50,000 performance bonus at the end of 6 months, and a letter of recommendation that will open doors at any company in Manhattan." Chloe did the mental math. With that money, she could pay off her college debts, help her mother with medical expenses, and still have an emergency fund. It was too tempting an offer to refuse. "There are some conditions," she finally said. Robert straightened. "Of course, what are they?" "First, no surprise kisses. If we need to keep up appearances in public, give me advance notice so I can prepare myself mentally." He nodded, though something in his eyes suggested he was remembering this morning's kiss as much as she was. "Second condition, I maintain my professional independence. I won't be treated like an accessory or trophy. My opinions and intelligence continue to be valued." "Absolutely," Robert agreed immediately. Actually, that will be crucial to making the relationship convincing. Everyone knows I wouldn't tolerate a partner who was just pretty. Chloe felt an unexpected warmth from his comment, but continued. Third condition, total transparency between us. If the situation changes, if you decide you no longer need this charade, or if either of us develops emotional complications, we talk immediately. The last part made her blush, but she maintained eye contact. Robert studied her face for a long moment. Emotional complications, he repeated slowly. You know what I'm talking about. This kind of forced proximity, acting out intimacy, it can blur the lines between reality and fantasy. And you're worried that might happen? His question was loaded with an intensity that made the air in the office seem thicker. Chloe felt her pulse quicken. I'm being practical, she replied carefully. We're both attractive adults who will need to spend a lot of time together, performing a romantic relationship. It would be naive to ignore the possibility. Robert stood abruptly and walked to the window, hands buried in his pockets. You're right, of course. It's better to establish clear boundaries from the start. Exactly, Chloe agreed, trying to ignore the pang of disappointment she felt at how quickly he agreed. Any other conditions? Chloe thought for a moment. Just one. When this is over, when we no longer need to maintain this charade, we go back to a normal professional relationship. No awkwardness, no embarrassment. We continue working together as if nothing happened. Robert turned from the window, his green eyes studying her with an intensity that made her skin tingle. Do you really believe that will be possible? Pretending intimacy for months and then simply forgetting? His question echoed her own fears. Because the truth was that even now, even knowing it was all an act, she couldn't stop thinking about the warmth of his hands on her face, the taste of his lips, the way her whole body had reacted to that kiss. It has to be possible, she said firmly, because the alternative is too complicated for both of us. Robert nodded slowly, returning to his chair. So we have a deal? Chloe extended her hand. We have a deal. When their hands touched to seal the agreement, the same electric current from the morning passed between them. Both felt it, and both quickly released their hands as if they had touched something dangerous. Well, Robert said, his voice slightly hoarse, I suppose we need to start rehearsing our love story. I suppose we do, Chloe agreed, trying to ignore how her heart raced at the word love, even though it was just acting. How about we start with dinner tonight, Robert suggested. We need to synchronize our details before my father comes back with more questions. Where? My apartment, more private to discuss our strategy. The idea of being in Robert's personal space, away from the curious eyes of the office, made something stir in Chloe's stomach. But she had agreed to this arrangement and she needed to start somewhere. What time? 7:30. I can order Chinese food. Perfect. As Chloe stood to leave, Robert called her once more. Chloe? She turned at the door. Thank you, I know this is unusual, but I really appreciate that you're willing to help me. We're partners now, she said simply, in every sense. But as she walked back to her desk, Chloe couldn't help but wonder in exactly how many senses they would become partners over the next few months, and whether she would be strong enough to maintain the boundaries she had established when every fiber of her being was still vibrating with the memory of that kiss. Robert Carter's apartment was exactly what Chloe expected. A penthouse on the Upper East Side that screamed discreet wealth and impeccable taste. Floor-to-ceiling windows offered a stunning view of Central Park. Designer furniture blended harmoniously with modern art, and every detail seemed to have been carefully curated by professionals. Chloe arrived at exactly 7:30, wearing a simple, elegant navy blue dress, the most sophisticated she owned. Robert greeted her at the door wearing dark jeans and a white button-down shirt with rolled-up sleeves, a more relaxed version of himself that made her realize how much younger, more accessible he seemed away from the corporate environment. Punctual as always, he said, smiling as he led her inside. May I take your coat? When he helped remove the light coat from her shoulders, his fingers lightly brushed her skin, sending small electric shocks up her arm. If he noticed her reaction, he didn't show it. Your home is beautiful, Chloe said, looking around the open space that combined living room, dining room, and a gourmet kitchen equipped with appliances that probably cost more than her car. "Thank you. I bought it 3 years ago, but I admit I spend so little time here that sometimes it feels more like a luxury hotel than a home." There was a melancholy in his voice that made Chloe look at him more closely. "You work too much." "Family habit," he replied with an ironic smile. "My father always said that work is what separates winners from losers. And what do you think?" Robert stopped in the middle of the room, considering the question. "Lately, I've started to think that maybe he's wrong. That maybe there's more to life than winning the next client or closing the next deal." It was a surprisingly vulnerable admission, and Chloe felt something stir in her chest. Before she could respond, the doorbell rang. "Our food's here," Robert said, seeming almost relieved by the interruption. While he dealt with the delivery person, Chloe examined the photographs on the shelves. There were some of Robert younger with his parents, where she could see an elegant woman with brown hair and a warm smile, clearly his mother. There were also photos of him in college, at graduation, receiving business awards. But what struck her most was the absence. No photos with girlfriends, no images of intimate or personal moments. It was as if his emotional life was unexplored territory. "Find something interesting?" Robert asked, returning with aromatic bags of Chinese food. "Just trying to get to know my boyfriend better," Chloe replied with a smile. "After all, if we're going to convince your family, I need to know intimate details about your life." They settled on the Italian leather sofa, using the coffee table as an improvised dining table. Robert had ordered a variety of dishes: orange chicken, Mongolian beef, fried rice, spring rolls, enough to feed 4 people. "So," Chloe said, serving rice on her plate, "tell me about our love story. How exactly did we meet at this business conference in Boston?" Robert took a sip of red wine he had opened to accompany the meal. "The Northeast Business Innovation Conference in January, 3 days at the Fairmont Copley Plaza Hotel. Did you actually go to this conference?" "I did, and you?" Chloe laughed. "Robert, I was working at a library in Savannah in January. Not exactly the type of person who attends $5,000 business conferences." "Right," he said, looking slightly embarrassed. "So we need to adjust our story. How about, you were working as a freelance consultant for an Atlanta company that hired me to present at the conference?" "Better. And how did we meet specifically?" Robert leaned back on the sofa, his eyes sparkling with something that almost seemed like amusement. "You were in the audience during my talk on transformational leadership in the 21st century. After the presentation, you approached me to ask a question about how to apply these theories to smaller companies. And you were impressed with my question?" "Devastated," he said, his tone becoming softer, more intimate. "I challenged a specific point in my presentation with a perspective I had never considered. I invited you for coffee to discuss it further." Chloe felt her pulse quicken at the intensity in his voice, as if he were actually recalling a cherished memory instead of inventing a story. "And then?" "Then we spent 3 hours in the hotel lobby talking about business, life, dreams. You told me about growing up in the South, about your teacher mother, about how you always wanted to prove you were more than what people expected from a small-town girl." The precision of the details surprised her. "How do you know about my mother being a teacher?" "It's in your personnel file," Robert admitted. "Sorry, I too wanted to better understand who you were when I hired you." There was something touching about the idea that he had been interested enough to investigate her background. "And what else did you discover about me?" "That you graduated magna cum laude despite working part-time to help with household expenses, that you volunteered at the local library throughout college, that all your references speak of your integrity, intelligence, and compassion." Chloe felt her cheeks warm. "You really did your homework." "I always do," Robert said, but his voice had taken on a more personal quality. "The question is, did it work? Was our chemistry on the first date so strong that we decided to keep in touch?" "Apparently so, since 3 months later you offered me a job in New York. And you accepted not just for the job, but because there was something special between us." They looked at each other across the coffee table, and Chloe felt the lines between fantasy and reality beginning to blur. The way Robert was telling the story made it seem so real, so possible. "We need to talk about public appearances," she said, trying to return to the safer territory of logistics. If I'm going to be seen as your girlfriend, I need to fit into your world." Robert frowned. "What do you mean?" "You attend charity galas that cost $1,000 a plate. Your friends probably shop on Fifth Avenue. I buy clothes at Target. There's nothing wrong with your clothes." "There's nothing wrong, but there's something inappropriate," Chloe gently corrected. "If we want this to be convincing, I need to look like someone you would actually date." Robert was quiet for a moment, then nodded. "You're right. Tomorrow afternoon after work, we'll go shopping." "Robert, I can't afford—" "It's a company expense," he interrupted. "Consider it part of your new salary. Some appropriate clothes for social events, maybe some discreet jewelry." "You don't need to cover me in diamonds," Chloe said quickly. "Not diamonds," Robert agreed, "but maybe something personal, something that tells a story about our relationship." He stood and walked to an elegant bar in the corner of the room, returning with a small navy blue velvet box. "What's this?" Chloe asked, her heart beginning to beat faster. "A prop for our performance," Robert said, but there was something in his voice that suggested it was more than that. "Open it." Chloe opened the box with slightly trembling fingers and took a sharp breath. Inside was a delicate white gold necklace with a small star-shaped pendant, set with tiny diamonds that sparkled like points of light. "Robert, this is beautiful, but it belonged to my mother," he said softly. "Not the expensive piece, full of diamonds that she wore to official events. This was the necklace she wore every day, the one my father gave her on their first wedding anniversary." Chloe looked at the necklace, then at Robert, seeing a vulnerability in his eyes that made her understand the magnitude of what he was offering. "I can't accept this," she whispered. "It's not forever," Robert said, but his voice was hoarse. "Just while we're performing, but it needs to be something real, something with history. People in my family can detect falseness from miles away." Chloe gently touched the necklace, feeling the weight of the trust he was placing in her. "Are you sure?" "I'm sure." "Then can you help me put it on?" Robert nodded, taking the necklace from the box. Chloe turned around, lifting her hair, exposing her nape. When he approached from behind to fasten the clasp, she could feel the warmth of his body, the scent of his cologne, his breath lightly touching her skin. His fingers brushed her nape as he adjusted the necklace, and Chloe had to make a conscious effort not to shiver. When he finished, his hands remained on her shoulders for a moment longer than necessary. "Perfect," he murmured, his voice so close to her ear that she felt shivers run down her spine. Chloe turned slowly to face him. They were dangerously close now. She could see the golden flecks in his green eyes, the way his pupils had dilated slightly. "Robert," she whispered, a warning and an invitation at the same time. For a moment, the world stopped. He leaned imperceptibly toward her, and she felt her eyes close, her lips part in anticipation. Robert's phone ringing cut through the moment like a razor. They separated quickly, both breathing a little harder than normal. "I should answer that," Robert said, running a hand through his hair. "Of course," Chloe agreed, unconsciously touching the necklace at her throat. While Robert spoke on the phone in low tones, Chloe looked at herself in the window's reflection. The necklace looked perfect against her skin, delicate but distinctive. But more than that, she could see in her own eyes something that deeply worried her. She was beginning to forget that all of this was just an act. The weekend arrived with a mixture of nervousness and anticipation that kept Chloe awake late on Friday. Robert had spent the week preparing her for Sunday's dinner at the Carter mansion, an event he described as a social trial by fire, where she would be evaluated by all the important family members. "My grandfather Theodore is the key," Robert had explained while they returned from shopping on Fifth Avenue, where he had insisted she choose a completely new wardrobe. "If you win over old Ted, you'll have a powerful ally. He still has considerable influence over my father." Now standing in front of the mirror in her Brooklyn apartment, Chloe adjusted the teal silk dress they had chosen together. It was elegant without being ostentatious, sophisticated, but not intimidating. Robert's mother's necklace glowed softly against her skin, constantly reminding her of the trust he had placed in her. The doorbell rang at exactly 5:30. Robert looked impeccable in a dark grey suit, but Chloe could detect tension in his shoulders, in the way he checked his watch 3 times on the way to the limousine. "You're nervous," she observed, as they settled into the luxury vehicle's back seat. "I am," Robert admitted, surprising her with his honesty. "This isn't just any performance, Chloe. My family, they know how to find weak spots and exploit them. If they suspect we're faking—" "They won't suspect," Chloe said with more confidence than she felt. "We've practiced our story a dozen times. We know intimate details about each other's lives. We'll be fine." Robert took her hand, intertwining their fingers. Together? Together. The Carter mansion was an imposing property in Hampton that looked like it had stepped out of a movie about American aristocracy. Perfectly manicured gardens surrounded a colonial-style house with white columns and arched windows that glowed with golden light. When the limousine stopped at the circular entrance, Chloe could see elegant silhouettes through the main room windows. "Remember," Robert murmured as they walked to the front door, "you belong here. You're not trying to impress anyone. You're just being yourself." The door was opened by a uniformed butler before they could ring the bell. The mansion's interior was even more impressive than the exterior: Italian marble, crystal chandeliers, and an entrance hall with a vaulted ceiling that rose 2 stories. "Robert, darling." The voice belonged to an elegant woman of about 55, perfectly styled blonde hair and a smile that seemed genuinely warm. "And this must be Chloe." "Aunt Patricia," Robert said, kissing the woman's cheek. "Chloe, this is my Aunt Patricia, my mother's sister. It's a pleasure to meet you, Mrs. Patterson," Chloe said, extending her hand. "Patricia, please, and the pleasure is all mine, dear. Robert has told us so little about you that we were all dying of curiosity." Patricia guided them through a hallway decorated with paintings that were probably worth more than the house where Chloe grew up, until they reached a spacious drawing room where approximately 15 people conversed in small groups, champagne glasses in hand. "Grandpa," Robert called, approaching a man of about 80 seated in a leather armchair near the fireplace. Even seated, you could see where Robert had inherited his height and imposing presence. Theodore Carter had completely white hair, penetrating blue eyes, and a smile that suggested he knew secrets about everyone in the room. "So this is the boy who finally decided to bring a girlfriend home," Theodore said, his voice still strong despite his age. "And you, my dear," he directed his blue eyes to Chloe, "must be the young woman who managed to capture my stubborn grandson's heart." "I'm Chloe Bennett, Mr. Carter," she said, surprising both Robert and herself by inclining slightly in an almost imperceptible curtsy, something she'd seen in movies about royalty. "It's an honor to meet you." Theodore's eyes sparkled with what seemed like approval. A young lady with manners. How refreshing. "Sit here beside me, my dear. I want to hear all about how you tamed this lone wolf." As Chloe settled into the chair next to the family patriarch, she noticed Robert visibly relax. But his tranquility was short-lived. "What a surprise to find you here." The voice was familiar, crystalline, cold, and loaded with poorly disguised disdain. Madison Harrington stood at the drawing room entrance, wearing a red dress that probably cost more than Chloe's monthly salary, accompanied by a tall, blonde man who looked like he'd stepped out of an expensive menswear catalogue. "Madison," Richard Carter appeared behind her, looking slightly embarrassed. "I didn't know you were coming today." "Daddy invited me last week," Madison said, her blue eyes fixed on Chloe like a predator studying its prey. "Before certain recent revelations. I hope you don't mind our presence." "Of course not," Theodore said, but there was a note of steel in his voice. "Madison, introduce us to your companion. This is Braden Whitmore of the Boston Whitmores. Braden, these are the Carters." Braden moved through the room, greeting everyone with the confidence of someone accustomed to elite social circles. When he reached Chloe, he held her hand a moment longer than necessary. "And you must be Robert's famous girlfriend," he said, his smile not reaching his eyes. "Madison has told me so much about you." "I'm sure she has," Chloe replied calmly, elegantly withdrawing her hand. "Chloe was telling me about her work at the library in Georgia," Theodore said loud enough for the entire room to hear. "What a noble profession. I've always believed that people who work with books have the most interesting souls." "How charming," Madison commented, and everyone in the room could hear the disdain in her voice. "It must have been quite a change, from a small library to Carter Industries." "It was an exciting transition," Chloe replied, keeping her voice serene. Though I discovered that skills are more transferable than you might imagine. Organization, attention to detail, ability to anticipate needs, all essential whether you're managing a library or serving as an executive secretary. Executive secretary, Madison repeated as if the words tasted bitter. How convenient that Robert found love in the workplace. The tension in the room became palpable. Chloe felt Robert move slightly behind her, but before he could intervene, Theodore tapped his cane on the floor. "Madison, dear," the elderly man said, his voice seemingly gentle but with an underlying current of absolute authority. "You seem to have forgotten your manners. In my house we treat guests with courtesy, regardless of previous circumstances." Madison blushed slightly but didn't back down. "Of course, Mr. Carter. Sorry if I seemed rude. I'm just curious about this sudden love story." "And what specifically would your curiosity be?" Chloe asked, deciding to take the bull by the horns. "Robert and I met in January at a conference in Boston. It was very natural, actually." "How romantic," Madison said, but her eyes were calculating. "And you never mentioned this, Robert? In all our recent encounters?" Robert moved to stand beside Chloe's chair, placing a protective hand on her shoulder. "I keep my personal life private, Madison. I always have." "Until now, apparently." "Until now," Robert agreed, his voice gaining a softer quality as he looked at Chloe. "I hadn't found someone who made my personal life worth sharing." There was something about the way he said those words, the intensity in his green eyes when he looked at her, that made Chloe's heart skip a beat. For a moment, she almost forgot they were acting. "How sweet," Madison said, but the words sounded like broken glass. "And tell me, Chloe, what are your long-term plans with Robert, I mean?" It was a loaded question, and Chloe knew it. Madison was trying to force her into territory where she might stumble, where the temporary nature of her agreement with Robert could be revealed. "My plans," Chloe said slowly, looking around the room at all the faces watching her, "are to love Robert for as long as he'll let me, to build something real and lasting with a man who values intelligence over appearance, substance over status." She paused, then looked directly at Madison. "I believe that when you find someone who sees your soul instead of just your bank account, you fight for it, no matter where you came from or where you're going." The silence that followed was absolute. Then Theodore began clapping slowly. "Bravo, my dear. Bravo." He turned to Robert. "This one here, my boy, is a treasure. I hope you're smart enough to keep her." Robert looked at Chloe with an expression she couldn't decipher. Surprise, admiration, and something deeper that made her breath catch. "I intend to do exactly that, Grandpa." And in that moment, with his mother's necklace warm against her throat, and his green eyes fixed on hers with an intensity that seemed too real to be acting, Chloe wondered if either of them was still pretending. The 2 weeks following dinner at the Carter mansion passed in a haze of social events, business dinners, and public appearances that gradually became more natural, more intimate. Chloe found herself meeting Robert's friends, his colleagues, even some of his most important clients. And with each interaction, the line between performance and reality became more tenuous. It was a Thursday night when everything changed definitively. Robert had taken Chloe to a charity dinner at the Metropolitan Museum, an elegant event where Manhattan's powerful gathered to raise funds for educational programs. Chloe wore a black cocktail dress that Robert had insisted she buy, and his mother's necklace glowed softly under the museum's crystal lights. Throughout the evening, they had perfectly played the role of a couple in love. Robert kept his hand on the small of her back as they walked, whispered intimate comments in her ear that made her laugh genuinely, looked at her with an intensity that made other women sigh enviously. But it was during a break between speeches, when they were alone on the terrace overlooking Central Park, that something fundamental shifted between them. "You're doing perfectly," Robert said, offering her a glass of champagne. "Half the women in there are envious of the way I look at you." "And the other half?" Chloe asked, accepting the drink. "The other half are envious of the way you look at me." There was something different in his voice, less performative, more honest. Chloe studied him in the soft glow of the terrace lights, noticing how he had loosened his tie, how some strands of hair had escaped from his perfectly styled look. "Robert," she said hesitantly, "can I ask you a personal question?" "I think we're past the point of impersonal questions, don't you think? Why have you never really gotten married?" And don't give me the corporate answer about being focused on your career." Robert was quiet for a long moment, looking at the twinkling lights of the city below them. "Do you want the honest answer?" "I always want the honest answer." He turned to face her completely. "Because I've never met anyone who made me want to stop pretending." "Pretending what?" "That I don't need anyone, that I'm perfectly satisfied with business meetings and professional achievements, that I don't miss having someone to share victories and defeats with, someone who knows me beyond the public version of Robert Carter." The vulnerability in his voice made something stir deeply in Chloe's chest. "And now," he said, taking a step closer to her, "I'm starting to remember what it's like not to feel alone." The air between them became charged with electricity. Chloe could feel the warmth emanating from his body, could see how his green eyes had darkened slightly in the terrace's golden light. "Robert," she whispered, a warning and an invitation. "I know," he said, but didn't step away. "I know we established rules, boundaries. But Chloe, does this still feel like acting to you?" Before she could answer, his hand rose to gently touch her face, his thumb tracing the line of her cheek. It was such a tender gesture, so different from the impulsive kiss weeks ago, that it broke her heart in a completely new way. "No," she admitted, her voice hoarse, "it doesn't feel like acting." He leaned closer, until their breaths mingled in the small space between them. "Then maybe we can stop pretending, just for tonight." When their lips finally met, it was completely different from the first kiss. There was no desperate urgency or need to convince an audience. It was slow, exploratory, full of a tenderness that made unshed tears burn behind Chloe's eyes. Robert's hands intertwined in her hair, pulling her closer, while she let herself melt against his solid body. She could feel his heart beating against her chest, could taste the wine in the kiss, could feel the entire world disappearing until there were just the two of them under the stars. When they finally separated, both were breathing heavily. Robert rested his forehead against hers, eyes closed. "Chloe," he murmured, "what are we doing?" "I don't know," she admitted, "but I can't pretend I don't feel this." "Neither can I." They remained like that for a long moment, holding each other on the silent terrace, both aware that they had crossed a line from which there was no return. The sound of applause from inside the museum brought them back to reality. They separated slowly, both trying to recompose their social masks. "We should go back," Robert said, but his voice was hoarse, and he still hadn't completely let go of her hand. "We should," Chloe agreed, but didn't move. For the rest of the evening, they maintained appearances perfectly, smiling at other guests, participating in polite conversations, posing for photos for the society column. But there was an underlying tension between them, a constant awareness of each other that made every accidental touch a small, pleasurable torture. In the limousine on the way home, they sat on opposite sides of the back seat, as if physical proximity was too dangerous. The silence wasn't uncomfortable, but it was loaded with unspoken things. "Chloe?" Robert finally said as they were arriving at her Brooklyn apartment. "I know," she interrupted him gently. "I know this complicates everything, that it wasn't in the agreement." "This isn't about the agreement," he said intensely. "This is about the fact that I can't pretend anymore that you're just my employee pretending to be my girlfriend." Chloe looked at him across the small but significant distance between them in the back seat. "So what am I?" "You're—" He hesitated, running a hand through his hair. "You're the first person in years who makes me want to be honest about everything. And that scares you." "It terrifies me," he admitted with an ironic smile. The limousine stopped in front of Chloe's building. She knew she should get out immediately, maintain some distance until they both could process what had happened. But there was something in Robert's gaze that kept her glued in place. "Robert," she said softly, "what do we do now?" "I don't know," he replied honestly. "But I know I can't pretend that tonight didn't happen, and I know I don't want you to get out of this limousine if it means we're going back to pretending we're just boss and employee." Chloe closed her eyes for a moment, weighing her options. She could get out, keep things professional, protect her heart from the inevitable complication that would come with truly falling in love with Robert Carter. Or she could be brave. "Do you want to come up?" she asked, opening her eyes to meet his. "To talk. Just to talk. Are you sure?" "No," she said with a tremulous smile. "But I think we stopped playing it safe the moment we decided to pretend to be in love." Robert smiled, a true, vulnerable smile, completely different from his usual professional mask. "Then I think we should find out what happens when we stop pretending completely." As they walked together to her building, hands intertwined this time by choice and not necessity, Chloe knew she had just taken the biggest risk of her life. But looking at Robert, really looking at him, not at the powerful CEO or the arrogant heir, but at the man who had just admitted he was afraid of being honest, she realized that some risks were worth taking, even if it meant risking her heart in the process. 3 weeks had passed since the night on the Metropolitan Museum terrace, and the dynamic between Chloe and Robert had changed irreversibly. They hadn't officially redefined their relationship. They still maintained separate apartments, still spoke in terms of temporary agreement when discussing logistics, but there was a new intimacy between them that was impossible to ignore. It was a Tuesday morning when Madison Harrington decided to make her final move. Chloe was reviewing contracts at her desk when she heard the familiar click of expensive heels on the corridor marble. She looked up to see Madison walking toward her with the predatory confidence of someone who believed she held all the cards. "Ms. Bennett," Madison said, stopping in front of Chloe's desk with a smile that didn't come close to reaching her eyes. "What a surprise to find you still here." "Good morning, Madison," Chloe replied calmly, not getting up from her chair. "Robert is in a meeting with Japanese investors. If you'd like to schedule an appointment—" "Oh, it's not Robert I want to talk to," Madison interrupted, sitting in the chair reserved for visitors as if she owned the place. "It's you." Something in Madison's tone made Chloe's internal alarms go off, but she kept her expression neutral. "About what?" Madison crossed her legs elegantly, adjusting her light pink Chanel suit skirt. "About this pathetic charade you two are staging." Chloe's heart skipped a beat, but years of growing up in the South had taught her to maintain composure under pressure. "I'm sorry, I don't understand what you're talking about." "Please," Madison laughed, a cold, calculated sound. "Do you really think I'm stupid? A 3-month relationship that no one knew about? A small-town secretary who suddenly won the heart of Manhattan's most eligible bachelor? And what a coincidence to appear exactly when Robert needed to escape an inconvenient engagement." Chloe kept her hands steady on the keyboard, refusing to show any sign of nervousness. "If you have something to say, Madison, I suggest you say it clearly." "Very well." Madison leaned forward, her blue eyes gleaming with malice. "I know exactly what you are, dear. A second-rate opportunist who saw a chance to latch onto Carter family money and took it. But your little performance is coming to an end. And why do you think that?" Madison opened her Hermes bag and pulled out a manila folder. "Because, unlike you two amateurs, I do my homework properly." She slid the folder across the desk to Chloe, who reluctantly opened it. Inside were photographs, documents, and what appeared to be a private investigation report. "Interesting, isn't it?" Madison continued with evident satisfaction. "No evidence of you two together before 3 weeks ago. No photos, no joint transactions, no digital footprint of a relationship. And then suddenly, you're Manhattan's most passionate couple." Chloe leafed through the papers, feeling a chill in her stomach as she realized how meticulous Madison's investigation had been. There were even photographs of them on the museum terrace, but taken from an angle that made it look like they were just having a formal conversation. "You hired a private detective?" Chloe asked, unable to completely hide her surprise. "I protect my investments," Madison replied coldly. "And Robert Carter is a 20-year investment by my family." "Robert isn't an investment. He's a human being with the right to choose his own life." Madison laughed again. How adorable. The little country girl defending her Prince Charming. "But you don't understand how this world works, do you? People like Robert don't choose people like you. They might play with you for a while, but in the end, they always return to where they belong." The condescension in Madison's voice awakened something fierce within Chloe, an anger that had been fueled by years of people assuming they knew her worth based on her background. "People like me?" Chloe asked, her voice still calm but with an undercurrent of steel. "And what kind of person am I exactly, Madison?" "The kind who needs to lie and deceive to get a man that any woman of true quality could have honestly." It was at that moment that Robert's office door opened, and he emerged accompanied by 3 men in expensive suits. the Japanese investors. He was smiling, clearly satisfied with the meeting's outcome, until his eyes found Madison sitting at Chloe's desk. "Madison," he said, his voice immediately becoming colder, "I didn't know you were here." "Robert, darling," Madison rose gracefully, "I was just having an enlightening conversation with your girlfriend." Chloe saw Robert notice the open folder on her desk, saw how his jaw tightened as he processed what was happening. But before he could intervene, she stood and walked around the desk to face Madison directly. "You know what, Madison?" Chloe said, her voice clear enough for everyone on the floor to hear. "You're right about one thing. I am different from you. Exactly my point. I work for what I have," Chloe continued, not allowing Madison to interrupt her. "I don't expect my family name or my father's bank account to open doors for me. I don't hire detectives to spy on people when I can't get what I want, and I definitely don't put down other women because I feel threatened." Madison's mask of superiority began to slip. "You don't know anything about my life or my qualifications." "I know enough," Chloe replied, taking a step closer. "I know you see Robert as a prize to be won, not as a person to be loved. I know you're so used to getting what you want that you can't accept that someone might genuinely prefer another person's company." "And you think he really prefers you?" Madison asked, her tone becoming more desperate. "The little library girl who doesn't know the difference between a salad fork and a dessert fork." "Maybe not," Chloe admitted, surprising Madison with her honesty. "But I know that when Robert looks at me, he sees who I really am. He doesn't see a strategic alliance or a convenient business merger. He sees a woman who challenges him, who supports him, who loves him for the man he is, not for the last name he carries." The word "loves" hung in the air like thunder. Chloe realized she had just admitted her true feelings, not only to Madison, but to Robert and anyone who was listening. But she didn't regret it. "And you know what else, Madison?" she continued, her voice becoming stronger, more confident. "Even if our love story started unconventionally, even if we had to pretend at first, what I feel for Robert now is more real than anything you could offer him in 1,000 years of arranged marriage." Madison looked between Chloe and Robert, who had approached and was now standing behind Chloe, not touching her but clearly allied with her. "This won't last," Madison said, but her voice had lost all its previous confidence. "When the novelty wears off, when you realize you don't belong in his world, you'll leave, and I'll be here waiting. Then I suggest you find something better to do with your time," Robert said, his voice low and dangerous, "because you'll be waiting forever." He moved to stand beside Chloe, not for show or strategic necessity, but by choice. His hand found hers, intertwining their fingers with a firmness that spoke of certainty, not convenience. "Madison," he continued, "I want you to be very clear about one thing. Chloe isn't my fake girlfriend. She's not a temporary distraction or a way to avoid family responsibilities. She's the woman I love, and if you or anyone else tries to harm or humiliate her again, you'll discover exactly how protective I can be." The silence that followed was absolute. Even the Japanese investors, who probably didn't fully understand what was happening, could feel the intensity of the moment. Madison looked at their intertwined hands, at the determined expressions on both faces, and finally seemed to understand that she had lost completely. "This is a mistake," she said, but it sounded more like a last gasp of desperation than a real threat. "You'll both regret this." "The only thing I regret," Robert said calmly, "is taking so long to realize that sometimes the best things in life come disguised as unlikely situations." Madison picked up her bag with forced dignity, but as she passed Chloe, she whispered low enough for only her to hear. "Enjoy it while it lasts, dear. Men like him always come home." "Maybe," Chloe whispered back, "but sometimes they discover that home isn't a place, it's a person." After Madison left, leaving only the echo of her heels in the corridor, Robert turned to Chloe with an expression she couldn't decipher. "So," he said softly, "you love me?" Chloe felt her cheeks flush, but met his green eyes without hesitation. "Yes, I love you. And I don't regret saying it in front of half a dozen people and the woman who wanted to marry you." Robert smiled, not his polished corporate smile, but something genuine, vulnerable, and completely in love. "Well," he said, pulling her closer, "that makes it much easier to say that I love you too." And there, in the middle of Carter Industries' office, Surrounded by slightly confused Japanese investors and employees who finally had the gossip of the century, Robert Carter kissed Chloe Bennet as if it were the first time. And maybe, in a way, it really was. 6 months after the confrontation with Madison, Chloe's life had transformed in ways she never could have imagined. What had begun as a desperate charade had blossomed into a genuine relationship that surprised even those who knew Robert Carter well. It was a Friday afternoon when Richard Carter appeared in Robert's office without warning, something that had become increasingly rare since the public confrontation with Madison. Chloe immediately noticed he seemed different, less authoritative, more reflective. "Mr. Carter," she said, rising from her desk, "Robert is on a conference call with London, but should be finished in a few minutes. Would you like to wait?" Richard studied her face for a moment, and Chloe saw something in him she wasn't used to seeing: uncertainty. "Actually, Ms. Bennet—" "Chloe," he corrected himself. "It's you I'd like to speak with first." Chloe blinked in surprise, but gestured to the waiting area with comfortable chairs near the windows. Richard settled in, looking almost uncomfortable, a strange sight for a man accustomed to commanding boardrooms. "You must be wondering why I'm here," he began, clasping his hands. "A little," Chloe admitted, settling into the opposite chair. Richard was quiet for a moment, looking out the window at the Manhattan view. "My son is different. Have you noticed? Different how? More present, more human." Richard looked at her directly. "Yesterday he left the office at 6 in the evening." "6, Chloe. In the past 10 years, I've never seen him leave before 9. Chloe smiled softly. "We had tickets to a concert at Lincoln Center." "Exactly. Robert, who used to cancel vacations to close deals, now schedules meetings around concerts." Richard shook his head, but there was something that almost seemed like admiration in his voice. "Last month he flew to Savannah to meet your mother." She was enchanted with him, Chloe said, remembering how her mother had called after the visit, practically whispering about how Robert had insisted on helping her with the garden and had spent a full hour looking at photo albums of Chloe as a child. "I'm sure she was. And your grandfather Theodore won't stop talking about how you made him laugh during his birthday dinner last week." Chloe waited, sensing there was something more significant Richard wanted to say. "I came here," he finally said, "to apologize." "Apologize?" "For my behavior, for how I tried to force Robert into a marriage that would clearly make him miserable, for how I treated you in those first weeks." Richard sighed deeply. "I spent so much time focused on expanding the family empire that I forgot that empires without happy heirs are just empty buildings." The honesty in his voice touched something in Chloe's heart. "Mr. Carter?" "Richard, please. We're family now, aren't we?" Chloe felt her eyes fill with tears. "Robert and I haven't officially discussed—" "Chloe," Richard interrupted gently. "I built a billion-dollar empire by learning to read people, and I can tell you with absolute certainty that my son is hopelessly in love with you. The question isn't whether you'll get married. It's when." Before Chloe could respond, Robert's office door opened and he emerged, looking slightly surprised to find his father having an intimate conversation with Chloe. "Dad, did something happen?" "Actually, yes," Richard said, standing. "I finally came to my senses." Father and son looked at each other for a moment, and Chloe could see years of unresolved tension hovering between them. "Robert," Richard continued, "I want you to know that I completely accept your choice. Chloe she's perfect for you, and I'm sorry it took me so long to realize it." Robert blinked, clearly shocked. "Dad, There's more," Richard interrupted. "The board and I had a long discussion about the company's management structure. We decided to create a new position, Director of Talent Development and Corporate Culture." He turned to Chloe. "It's yours if you want it. Executive salary, profit sharing, complete autonomy to reform how we treat and develop our employees." Chloe was speechless. I don't know what to say." "Say yes," Robert said, smiling broadly. "You've been talking about corporate culture and employee well-being for months. This is your chance to really make a difference." "But I don't have executive experience." "You have something better," Richard said. "You have heart, intelligence, and the rare ability to see people as human beings, not just resources. That's exactly what this company needs." 3 months later, Chloe was in her new office on the 45th floor, reviewing proposals for the mentorship program she had developed, when Robert appeared in the doorway with a strange expression on his face. "Ready to go?" he asked. They had plans to dine at the Carter mansion for grandfather Theodore's 82nd birthday. "Almost," Chloe said, saving the document she was working on. "Just let me grab my purse." Theodore's birthday party was an intimate gathering, just immediate family and some close friends. The family patriarch was in excellent form, telling stories from the company's early days and making everyone laugh with his perceptive observations about modern politics. When it came time for the traditional toast, Theodore stood up, gently tapping his glass with a spoon. "My dears," he began, his voice still strong despite his age, "at 82 I've learned that true wealth isn't in bank accounts or properties. It's in moments like this, surrounded by the people I love." He looked directly at Robert and Chloe. "And it's in seeing the people we love find their own true happiness." That's when Robert stood up, looking simultaneously nervous and determined. "Actually, Grandpa, since we're talking about true happiness..." Chloe watched him with growing surprise as he pulled a small velvet box from his jacket pocket. Her heart stopped completely when he knelt beside her chair. "Chloe Elizabeth Bennett," he said, his voice clear and firm despite the obvious nervousness. "6 months ago, you agreed to pretend to love me to help me escape a marriage I didn't want. But somewhere in the middle of all our acting, something magical happened." Tears began streaming down Chloe's cheeks as she looked at him, barely able to breathe. "You taught me that true love isn't about finding someone perfect," Robert continued, opening the box to reveal a stunning vintage diamond ring. "It's about finding someone who makes you want to be a better version of yourself every day." The ring was clearly a family piece, an Art Deco solitaire surrounded by small diamonds, elegant and timeless. "This ring belonged to my great-grandmother Margaret," Robert explained. "The woman who helped my great-grandfather build this company from nothing. She was brave, intelligent, compassionate, exactly like you." Chloe couldn't speak, could only look between the ring and Robert's green eyes filled with love and hope. "So, my love, do you want to stop pretending completely? Will you marry me for real?" "Yes," Chloe whispered, then louder. "Yes, yes, 1,000 times yes." The room exploded in applause and tears as Robert slipped the ring on her finger and kissed her as if there was no one else in the world. "About time!" Theodore shouted, clapping. "I was starting to think I'd have to plan this proposal myself." 6 months later, on a perfect spring morning, Chloe walked down the makeshift aisle in the Carter Mansion gardens, wearing her dream wedding dress and the necklace that had belonged to Robert's mother. Her own mother was in the front row, crying proudly, while Theodore, acting as honorary officiant, waited at the altar with Robert. When Chloe reached Robert and saw the tears of joy in his green eyes, she knew with absolute certainty that sometimes the most beautiful lies transform into the most precious truths. And when they kissed as husband and wife, sealing a union that had begun with a desperate kiss and blossomed into true love, the entire Carter property echoed with applause and laughter. Because sometimes, when you least expect it, an unexpected kiss can change everything. And sometimes, just sometimes, happy endings happen to people brave enough to risk their hearts on the possibility of true love. Sometimes, life's most desperate moments lead us exactly where we need to be. What began as a desperate lie transformed into the purest truth Chloe and Robert had ever known. They discovered that true love doesn't follow scripts. It writes its own story, one brave page at a time. And maybe that's what makes every love story unique. The courage to believe we deserve to be loved exactly as we are. Because in the end, we're all just looking for someone who sees us, really sees us. If this story touched you, please give it a like, subscribe to the channel and tell us in the comments. Where are you listening to this message from? Your support is what allows us to keep bringing you stories like this.